So here's the Fusion login screen. I have to type in my login ID and my password. And Fusion works a little bit different than most other programs because your files, while they're local, are actually stored and synced online. Also, you cannot locally load a file, you have to upload it first. Then Fusion checks it and then converts it into a Fusion file. Because Fusion Online then has so many more functions, for example, also for assemblies, etc. And the nice part is if you work on one computer or log out, you go to a different computer, log into Fusion, your files are there. So that's a huge advantage. So this is basically your starter screen. You see I have some icons. I can click here for different sortings. I have some layers, etc. Folders. I can invite people. I can share something. I can search for something. And here's the icon for uploading something. So I can click Upload, select Files, go to Desktop, and here's my wire file. Open, and simply click Upload. Now this one is going to take 1 or 2 minutes because, again, what Fusion is doing, it's not simply just opening the file, it's actually uploading it, and then it is converting the file, checking if there are any problems with it, and then if everything is fine, it gives you a new Fusion file will be listed here, and then you can double click and start it. So once this one is done, I'm going to pause and then I will be back. Okay, so Fusion uploaded the file and it's ready to work with. Took 2 minutes roughly. Here is the icon. I can double click it and then it will load it. Let's click on the dial pad to close that window. And here it is. So first thing we notice is the object is rotated 90 degrees. So again, between different programs, sometimes Y and Z axis are being confused, but that's not really a major problem. We can later, for example, rotate it here. And if we, for example, want to bring this one back into Alias, I'm not going to rotate my object here because otherwise then I bring it into Alias rotated. But I can work in this model also with the knife upside down. Second observation, you noticed actually we have many objects here. Here's our blade, here's the other blade, and here are multiple surfaces. For example, body 1 and 8, body 2. For example, that's a blade. This, for example, is our stitched and trimmed object, which actually, as we can see, it says 8 and it has this open shell, so it means this one is stitched, but it's not watertight, not solid, like for example those two. And then, for example, we have this folder here is being called unstitched. There are all the other different surfaces. And basically everything what you see here is whatever we have on all these layers. And that's going to be brought over into Fusion. The only thing, for example, you will see that's not here is actually we do not have any lines, sketches, all this stuff. So Fusion is kind of like more working as a solid modeler like Pro-E or SolidWorks. So they don't really offer 3D sketching like you're used to in Alias. They're more, I would say, I don't want to say traditional, but they basically only allow you to sketch two-dimensional. So you have to think somewhat differently how to build parts inside Fusion if you want to start from scratch. However, the surfacing tools are most parts pretty much the same. So that's where they nicely actually offer the same functionality. So let's clean up everything. So for example, maybe I can hide this one. Here's this one blade, there's the other blade. And for example, let's go to here. And now let's take a look at maybe the problem we have because this one isn't stitched and how we could solve this in Fusion. So let's take a look at how we can maybe try to turn this one from an open shell into a closed shell or solid. First, we have to switch to the patch area. And patch is basically kind of like the surfacing tools in Alias. So you see you have sweep, revolve, loft, patch, etc. Modify, we have some tools like fillet and chamfer, trim, extend, unstitch, merge. So there's actually some similarity between the Alias and the Fusion surfacing tools. So first what I would like to do is actually unstitch. So they're all separate. And then actually let's select everything and click stitch. We have tolerance set to stitch everything till 0.01. And there I see something in red. So middle mouse button and shift rotates your view. Let's zoom in and oh, you see those edges are not even remotely close to each other. Let's set the tolerance a tick higher. But here you see actually it works really well. So the edges there seem to meet. Well, let's go to Studio. Rotate, let's zoom in. And oh, I see it here already. Indeed, actually, there's a major gap. So yeah, I guess when we created the revolve tool on base layer here and there, let's take a look how stuff looks here. And yeah, there it is. So from the beginning, that was an incredibly terrible lineup. So I should have probably tried to intersect both, trim, and then stitch. However, there's actually a small workaround which we can do in Fusion. So I simply select it, go to modify, and then this is not really good practice, but in this case I know it will work. I say snap it, and then let's take a look, and you see actually it is, at least for the moment, closed. You see it's a watertight body. Okay. So that's, for example, everything for trying to get this one ready. Maybe let me show you kind of like how here, for example, we have a fillet tool. So here now I could, for example, select all those different edges. And you see this actually works pretty much the same way as the edge rounding tool in Alias. Maybe let's give this radius of a 3 millimeters. Nope, that's too big. Because down here, you see, hey, we get exactly the same problem. Corner option. See, I have a different corner here. And here's also G2. Now we have, if you really pay close attention to the shading, you see it changed slightly. Pay attention specifically here. This is a nice arc now. This feels a little bit flat. Okay. So, however, in this mode, we don't really want to do everything. So where we are right now, this is basically called the direct modeling environment. And that, for example, means everything what we do here is kind of like without, let's say, in Alias terms, without construction history. but the assembly I actually want to do inside the timeline. But before I do this, actually, I'm going to show you an alternative way how, for example, to solve this problem we have down here. So let me actually undo everything and let's go back to the stage. So let's take a look at which strategies we have to solve this problem here. Now we know the parts don't line up correctly, and we can either try to fix it inside Fusion. So you see, for example, I have an extend command also here, and I could, for example, extend the edges of those parts and then trim it. Or if, for example, I would like to have this change I'm going to do here also in the alias model, I go back to my alias model first. And for the moment here, this one I can delete. And for example, here, this is all grouped right at the moment, so I ungroup it. And then I go to extend. And the extend tool here is actually also the same like in Fusion. See, these commands are actually, to be quite honest, program independent. It's always the same stuff. Trim, project, join, stitch, extend, align. They all have it. So it will work exactly the same way. So I can go and click extend. Click, for example, onto maybe this edge there. And because of how I built this one from the beginning, it was not necessarily a very good surface, because the revolve surface actually is just 360 instead of two halves. So you see, for example, here in Fusion, those are two halves. I have actually three markers. So for example, I could extend one side, you see. And that is again because down here, for example, is the surface edge, and for the cap, here's the surface edge. So I have two endpoints here. So that simply only means for this part, I want to click on this one, which is on the edge, and this actually, as you can see, extends the surface completely. Perfect. So let's go to extend and click. Maybe the wireframe mode will help. Extend. Okay, why doesn't it allow me to select the part? Okay, it can be selected. Extend. Okay, maybe it will help actually when I hide this one for the moment. Let's go back to extend. No, it still doesn't do it. No, this is actually interesting. And I don't know if this is maybe because it got trimmed. So let's try this one for the moment. Untrim this shell. Let's go to extend. Let's do another untrim and extend. See, now it works. Okay, I have my lower and my two edges here. So here I would like to extend this part. Perfect. And then actually I can go back to trim and say here, this part, yeah, keep, and it cuts everything else back. Because the trim curves which we've created on the surface remain. So not a big deal. Okay, let's go back. Let's show everything. And now in this case here, I'm going to trim those two. So intersect this surface, spacebar with this surface, and then trim, keep, and keep. There we are. Okay, now let's make a check. We select all those surfaces, go to the stitch command, stitch. Oh, interesting. See, we get another problem there. That shouldn't actually happen because right now we stitched it cleanly. But if I zoom in at least, I don't see a blatant gap between the surfaces. And Fusion here in this area did not complain. So let's keep it. So I'm definitely sure that's a tolerance problem here, or the reason for why this doesn't work. Let's go to assign. So I could either export the complete shell, or I would like to show you the following. I simply select those two surfaces, for example, and then let's go to File, Export Active As, because those are the only two parts I changed. The other surfaces I already have inside Fusion, so I don't want to bring them over again. Let's export those two, and let's go into Fusion, and I have to upload those first. So I go to Upload, Desktop, here's the update, Upload. Okay, and this will take a moment to work, and while this won't work, let's take a look at how this functionality, for example, can work in Fusion. Because it's always good if you know if maybe one program doesn't work, how to do it in a different program. Because sometimes even while the tools are the same, sometimes the software still works a little bit different. So for example, to make life a little bit easier, I'm going to unstitch first this object. Okay. And then I'm going to select those two, right mouse button, hide. Okay. Extend. And you see, actually, interestingly, Fusion gives me different edges to click, and I don't really want to have multiple segments extended. I want everything at once. So I click all those edges till, for example, I have a complete ring highlighted. You can also type in 3mm, and there's this disk extended. Perfect. Now let's see actually if maybe this is already enough to trim. So here we have trim, and it basically says trim tool. So this is my trim tool. This is what I would like to trim. Okay. Worked. And let's do it one more time. Trim tool, trim part. Okay. And yeah, we got that. Didn't work. So undo. Let's go back and maybe select those two and hide them. The trim, for example, on one side failed because obviously the surfaces don't perfectly intersect. So let's take a look if maybe here we can select everything, maybe a millimeter. Oh, and we get an error message. Let's see if maybe the setting. Oh, look, this one actually helped. So, oops, 4mm. Okay. Let's do the same here. 4mm. So, for example, I don't really like that I have those segments here. That makes the surface unnecessarily complex. I'm curious if maybe I could merge them together. And it worked, but it changed my design slightly, so nope. Okay, not really good. Okay, last check to see if this one, if it even can somewhat work. So you see those edges for those surfaces are close to there. I will end up probably with some quite annoying fragments. But let's see. Let's go trim, say this tool. And yeah, it does work. Okay, maybe what I do first is shift select those elements and then I stitch it. So it's one logical group. And I go back to trim and say, this is my tool. Yeah, still doesn't work. Okay, so this basically, because the edges are properly too close, and in general, this geometry is not really great. This process didn't really work. Well, I could maybe trick around a little bit and see, maybe I move this one just up a millimeter or half a millimeter, so that where my dome intersects the surface, it's not along those surface edges. So we can go to move, I go to manipulator, and you see up here I have the small icon and I can reorient that manipulator. And you see when I move it over a surface, it always reorientates itself. It's actually pretty nice. And I know when I go to the tip, it will be vertical. So click on the check mark so it doesn't adjust anymore. And now I can maybe move this one up, but actually just half a millimeter, or maybe 2. I can get close to that edge there. Okay. Now here I'm going to simply unstitch them, and those parts I created I just throw away. I don't want them anymore. There, delete that one. Okay, and let's go back to trim and say this one, cut this. Okay, and you see this case it worked. And say trim this one away, trim you, cut this part, and trim you, cut this part. Okay, now this actually, that approach worked actually quite good. So I'm going to select all those 4 surfaces and stitch them together. Everything works. Okay. And then let's open the file browser. You see now here's actually my imported alias updated model. And all I can do, right mouse button and say insert. Wait a second, and then we should soon have the part actually inside our document. There it is. Perfect. So there are those 2 unstitched elements. Let's hide this one. And interesting, didn't I? I mean, oh wait, that was the stitched one. So I did the, sorry, there was a trimmed surface already. I just confused myself. I thought like I imported an old version. So if I select those 2 and stitch them, yeah, you see they perfectly match. So that's a good surface. Okay, so you saw that's basically the same process, either fixing it in Alias and then bringing that shell back into Fusion, or trying to do an adjustment inside Fusion. You can see the steps are pretty much the same, but in this case actually the route through Alias actually worked better, because Fusion was a little bit more picky about extending those edges. So what I'm going to do then in this case, I want to select all those parts. Also this one here, can I drag it to there? Yep. So you see I clicked and dragged it. This part, delete, select everything and stitch. All worked. Perfect. Now I have here my attempt of how I fix stuff by hand in Fusion. I delete that one because now I know that actually everything I have here is exactly also the same in Alias. And to be quite honest, that's the way how I would like to keep my design. So whenever I need to go back to Alias, that is really the same modeling stage than I have, for example, in Fusion. So now it's time to actually make the transition into the timeline, which is the parametric mode in Fusion. Currently, all this is the direct modeling. So when we do something, it is basically final. So for example, if we round an edge, the surfaces are split and we have the new blend surface in between. While the design history, think about it more as you have objects and then you apply effects to the objects like rounding edges, calculating volumes together, etc. To do this, or to switch to the design timeline, we go to the highest element, right click and select Capture Design History. The main difference you will see is the model mode has two more objects, base feature and create form. The sculpt mode is missing because this is inside the create form. And the patch mode, for example, currently only has two commands here, and also here some commands are missing. Those are currently in development. Those lists will be more populated. But essentially, those are similar functions, but the way how they all interact and what interactive design capability this gives you is different. And down here, we have the design timeline. So this is basically the most impressive part of Fusion for me as a product designer, because it visually shows me later how I start constructing and developing my product. So for example, down here you see there's a group, and if I click on the plus, I expand it, and here's a base feature. So what's a base feature? You can right click on it and say edit, and look at this. We are back actually at our main object inside design mode. Sorry, in direct modeling. So I can, for example, adjust this model if I want inside the base feature, and then click finish, and then I'm back in the design timeline. For the moment, I would like to delete this group, but actually expand its content, so I just only have this highlight. So let's say we would like to bring over our blade. Here's my blade. All I can do is right click, insert, and I see it's downloading the model. Okay. And down here you see we have a new base feature. So you see my object here was introduced as a new base feature. Also here you see I have the blade. So this is, for example, the bodies for this part, and then here this is for my blade. Okay, maybe let's keep this one invisible for the moment, and let's take a look at what we can do with, for example, the design timeline. Now, for example, we could round those edges. This works, yeah, the same way like in Alias. Selecting those edges, defining a value to millimeters. I can change the corner option, set it to G2 if I want to, Click OK. And now you see here there is the fillet feature. So you see visually what type of feature you have added. If I move my mouse over it, you also see the part highlighted that's being created or affected. I can right mouse button, for example, say suppress. It's ignoring that fillet. Unsuppress. It calculates it. And there's a time marker. You see I can left mouse button, move it forward and backwards. And for example, in time, I go backwards. So for example, now here, maybe I would like to core this part out. So let's go to shell. I'm going to select this front face and maybe say 2 mm. Maybe this looks a little bit too big, maybe 1.5. Click OK. And now you see I have this part cored out. So maybe to see what's happening, let's go to inspect, go to section. Let's show my origin, so I can click on this plane. So I clicked on this vertical plane. And you see here is a marker I can move forward and backwards. That, for example, changes the position of my section view. Click OK. And there, for example, you can see how my part got shelled out. Now if I go back to here, see it's solid, cored out, and we rounded the edges. But here actually you see I only rounded the outside edges, and I think for the inside that didn't work yet. So let's go on to edit. So you see I can work on those edges, and I think let's go to here and let's see if that is on the Mac, the command, and I think on Windows that's control. Click and I hold my command key and click on those additional edges, release it, and then I added more edges, but probably the radius is just too big. So for example, what I can say, cancel, I could maybe add another fillet, and then here set this one maybe for 1 mm and see that one works. If, for example, I want to round the inside, of course. Okay, so now I have another fillet, and you see I can move forward and backwards. And I can also delete this feature. And I'm not really touching my design. I'm just basically selecting edges and rounding them. So that's a nice part about how this workflow actually works. I can turn my section view off to see my object again. So, for example, let's try to round this one. And I think I'm going to run into some troubles there based on how crappy I think I built this one in Alias before. So let's see. 2 mm, yep. Inconsistent edge, yeah. So the main problem is, I think, is because I didn't really create clean and good geometry there. So for us, this looks visually okay, but you have to think about the math behind it, what the software has to do. So I could go back into Alias and split those edges, specifically this face and also my cap. I want to be half and half and not just one surface, which is closed. Those are really prone for creating those problems. And you maybe remembered also in Alias that the surface fillet doesn't like those surfaces, because here we have two edge points. So let me see what I can do. Let's try test one. I'm going to say split body and say this body. Split tool is going to be this plane. Now my object in Alias was built perfectly in the world center, so you see my z-axis and my y are lined up perfectly with the center of my object, so I can actually use this plane. Click OK. Let's take a look what we have. And you see that now I have two different parts. So you see here, there's a split command. Now let's see if I can round this edge maybe. See there, now this works. Maybe two. Okay. Obviously, I have to do the same also to my other part. There. Perfect. Okay. I could also have went into, for example, the direct modeling, go to edit, and actually to this object did like a split body or split face here as well. But then I would have permanently cut this object for real. And you see here inside direct modeling, this is still my original surface. And inside the parametric mode, you see this part is cut. So maybe let's actually, I would like to see my blade and see how does my blade look like? How does it sit inside this shell? Does it match, or for example, does it intersect? And it slightly intersects there. So for example, this my blade, I have to move a little bit. And I have to rotate, so you can see, for example, this surface here is slightly not good. Okay, so let me first save. And then let's go to move. Now I'm moving this component basically into the right position. Also here I would like to adjust where, for example, this part will be. Now you see, once I click on this reorient, I get a lot of those interesting blue or yellow, white markers. For example, they describe midpoints on a face. So you see those triangles, corner points, those circles. And fortunately, everything was built very symmetrical. So I can move my mouse to this edge, and you see the blue arrow is really perpendicular to that face. Okay, click. And now I can, for example, move this one down, but I'm moving with the grid. So in this case here, I'm turning the grid off there. Now I can move this one more freely. Okay. And maybe let's try to rotate this object a little bit. I move my mouse further away while pressing the left mouse button so I can better rotate it. Well, let's see, maybe what does 1 degree say? Maybe 0.5, 0.6. Yeah, maybe keep it at that. Okay. And now, how far do I want the blade, for example, to stick out? I can, now with this marker, move it in there, maybe. It's your question, how do you want to line this up? This way, for example, let's see. So this part sticks out. Think about like how much of the blade do you expose? And maybe for the moment, let's leave it there. Let's look around a little bit. So we see actually, what thickness do we have? Let's go to edit. So I have 1.5 millimeter thickness. So that's not really a lot of material. So let me check actually my own model I have. And let me insert the blade quickly. So maybe actually I made this part a little bit too skinny here. So I basically have the following problem. If, for example, as you can see, I make this one 2 mm thick, my blade doesn't fit in there. So I could, if I want to, at least for prototyping, uh, build it in a way so I add material thickness, but then later cut kind of like the space out of the shell. So at least for the prototype, I can put my blade into it. And maybe for that case of prototyping, that's sufficient. Of course, if you want to be more serious, this is really a problem. So I would have to change my top surface. I'm going to show actually both steps, but I will focus first on the quick and dirty one. Because again, I would like to reinforce this idea of don't be too particular. Of course, try to be precise from the beginning, but don't overstress precision too much when you're only in the phase of exploring a concept. Because maybe you spent a lot of time on doing something really precisely, and then later you dump it anyway because you go with a different design. And then all the work was for nothing. But at one point you should then, when you figured out the design, really know how to do it right. So this is basically what I will do. I have to somehow create the geometry for this blade to rest on, so it is actually stabilized inside the shell. And then I also have to create the space for the blade top part to cut out of the shell, and this will be the first unit for another video I will focus on.